Hi, welcome to Pathology Riddles. Today we are going to deal with this topic called as cellular adaptations. In today's class we will mainly talk about hypertrophy and tomorrow we will deal with the hyperplasia. So let's start with what are cell adaptations. Just like when we are in stress, for example, whenever it is winter season we start wearing woolen clothes. Whenever it is summer season we shift to cotton clothes. Similarly, whenever cells have got any kind of stress, they are going to undergo some reversible changes in response to the changes in their environment. So these changes can occur in the number of cells. The number of cells can increase or decrease. It can happen in the size of the cells. That can also increase or come back to normal. Phenotype of cells. That is, squamous can become columnar, columnar can become squamous. Whenever the body feels that the metaplasia or the phenotype change can help it to better cope with stress in that particular area, then it will change the phenotype. Then you have this metabolic activity. So metabolic activity will increase when the functional demand increases. So the cell will adapt by increasing its metabolic activity so that it can cope with the stress. And finally, it can increase the functions of the cells or it can decrease the function of the cell. So these are all the cell adaptations that occur. And whenever that stimulus stops or that stress stops, then it will come back to its normal environment. That is, the cell will maintain its homeostasis. And we know that homeostasis is maintenance of the cell structure and function within a normal narrow range. So that is what we mean by cell adaptation. So what are the types of cell adaptation? We have got hypertrophy, we have got hyperplasia, we have got atrophy, metaplasia, and in some books dysplasia is there. In some books it is not there. Because it's not there, we will deal with it in the neoplasia chapter. For now, we will deal with hypertrophy, hyperplasia, atrophy, and metaplasia. So what do we mean by this term called as hypertrophy? As you can see, there is increase in the size of the alphabets this side. And why have I done that? In order that you may remember that increase in the size of cells resulting in an increase in the size of the organ is called as hypertrophy. Okay, when the size of the cells are going to increase, then the size of the organ is obviously going to increase. This happens mainly in those cells which are not able to divide. For example, cardiac cells or skeletal muscle cells. You know there are three types of cells, right? Which are the three types of cells? First one is, try to recall. First one is labile cells. That is the cells of our GIT, gastrointestinal system, or the cells of the skin, or the cells of the urogenital tract. These are capable of dividing. They divide almost every day. The second one is stable cells. They usually have the stem cells. Normally they don't divide, they are present in solid organs, but whenever there is an injury, whenever there is a requirement for dividing, then they will divide. For example, in the solid organs like liver. Then we have the cardiac muscles and the skeletal muscles, which usually do not divide and they heal by scar formation. So in these type of cells, we have got this phenomenon called as hypertrophy. There is size of the cell, increase in the size of the cell, which results in increase in the size of that particular organ. So what is the mechanism of hypertrophy? Hypertrophy mainly occurs because of increased functional demand, by growth factor stimulation, or by hormonal stimulation. Because of all this, they are going to increase the amount of proteins or the organelles inside the cell, which will increase the capacity of that cell to cope with stress. Basically, it will increase in size. In order to explain hypertrophy, usually we take myocardial hypertrophy as an example. So what happens in myocardial hypertrophy? Whenever the cell has increased workload, what will happen is on the surface of the cell there are something called as mechanical sensors. Then we have got some receptors for growth factors. Growth factors like insulin-like growth factor, transforming growth factor beta, and fibroblast growth factor. Then we also have certain receptors for vasoactive agents like adrenergic hormones. So as a result of all these three, that is the mechanical sensors, the vasoactive agents and the growth factors, when they are all stimulated, they are going to go and stimulate certain pathways, transduction pathways. Okay, these transduction pathways are predominantly PI3K AKT pathway, that is phosphoinositide 3 kinase AKT pathway, and G protein coupled receptor pathway. It might sound a little complicated, but if you just remember as PI3K AKT pathway and G protein coupled receptor pathway, it's enough. So finally what they are going to do, they will go and cause three things. One is they will produce more growth factors. So this particular hypertrophy becomes more and more stronger. Second, it will synthesize contractile proteins. Okay, now the heart muscle has to pump more and more. It has to work more and more. So it will produce more and more contractile proteins. And third, it will induce some embryonic or fetal genes which are able to contract better and using less energy. So in this way, the heart is able to better cope with the stress or increased functional demand. A quick revision, we have got three types of things, that is mechanical sensors, we have got receptors for vasoactive agonists or hormones, we have got receptors for the growth. Once these three are bound, they are going to activate these two pathways, PI3K AKT pathway, or the other pathway is G protein coupled receptor pathway. So the end result of all this is going to be production of more growth factors. Second one is synthesis of contractile proteins. And third one is induction of embryonic or fetal genes which have better capacity to have a better contraction. Okay. So these are the ways in which the hypertrophy happens in myocardium. So the examples of hypertrophy can be divided into physiological hypertrophy and pathological hypertrophy. An example of physiologic hypertrophy is skeletal muscle hypertrophy. Now, when does skeletal muscle hypertrophy occur? As you know, the bodybuilders who go to the gym regularly, they have got increased workload. Okay, whenever there is increased functional demand, what will happen is the skeletal muscles will have increased production of these proteins, and they will increase the size of the myofilaments, and finally there will be hypertrophy of the muscle fibers. Especially, you know, all these six packs, it happens mainly because of this mechanism of hypertrophy. Next example of physiologic hypertrophy is smooth muscle hypertrophy in pregnant uterus. This happens mainly because of the hormone called as estrogen. Now this estrogen is going to act on estrogen receptors which are present on the smooth muscle cells of the myometrium, and they will increase the size of the smooth muscle cells of the uterus, and that increases the size of the uterus during pregnancy. Next we have got pathological hypertrophy. Especially the left ventricle undergoes hypertrophy in cardiac disease. So this happens mainly because there is more hemodynamic overload, means the muscles have to pump the blood against resistance. For example, there could be hypertension, increased pressure, or there could be faulty valves. These valves will be very narrow, means they will decrease the space and they won't be working very efficiently. So the pressure on these muscles will increase. So as a result, they will have to work excessively so that the blood is pumped out from the left ventricle. So as a result, it hypertrophies. The muscles over there hypertrophy. The mechanism is similar to the skeletal muscles that we saw in the people who are hitting the gym every day. So that's about the hypertrophy, and next we will deal with hyperplasia tomorrow. I hope you have understood this. In case you have any doubts, you can message in the comments. This is Dr. Susan signing out till we meet in the next video.